All right, we're live. Let's make sure we get a clear image on the YouTube. Welcome, everybody. As always, we're going to go ahead and play a little clip. Which intro do you want to play?
Play the
Longo?
Coquina Cowboys.
Alrighty, let me make sure. Okay, looks good. I'm going to go ahead and play the intro, and we'll see you guys in a few seconds as everybody comes in.
Cocaine is a hell of a drug.
All right, guys. Everyone, welcome. We've got a very special guest tonight. Brett Hemphill is a Florida diver, cave diver. I'm not sure what the proper title is. How would you like to introduce yourself, Brett?
Just a cave diver, cave explorer, documentation.
Mm-hmm. And when we say cave, we're not talking about walking through caves. We're talking about subterranean waterways, caverns, passages, big openings filled with water. And if you've been watching my channel, you've probably seen a little bit about the springs. I talk about the spring water and I talk about above ground a lot. But there's not much out there as far as beneath the aquifer, the source of these springs. Very few people have actually gone down in there. Brett is one of these people. And Brett's actually gone down pretty dang deep, deeper than most people would think you can go beneath Florida. People think that it's so close to sea level that there's not really much land to go down in underneath there. Well, we're going to watch some videos here in a sec, and you won't believe how expansive some of these openings are. But Brett, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself, how did you get into cave diving? Did you grow up in Florida? And maybe start there.
Well, my family's from Florida, and my father worked at NASA right up until the Apollo 8 project is where I was born on Cape Canaveral. After that, he moved on to different things, and at an early age of 14, I loved exploring, no matter where it was, creeks, rivers, climbing trees, and I was on a trip caving in Indiana and couldn't sleep one night, and myself and two of the other people went in and crawled through this space that they had never been in before, and we found this lake room, and I guess it all kind of started there. And when I began cave diving in 1990, it was literally within a year. My reason for really wanting to dive was to explore springs and sinkholes and places I just already at that time. And shortly after, my instructor desperately tried to convince me to move to Mexico because it was really believed that the Yucatan was the mecca for cave exploration. And because of the logistics involved in Florida caves, a lot of people really felt that there wasn't much left to explore here. But I was pretty well rooted, and I realized there were a lot of things in coastal areas and deeper things. And so it was really, it was an infatuation at first, but then it just really became something that just consumed me, trying to find new frontiers and new places to explore.
You're muted, Narco.
When did you start throwing on the tank and going deep in some of these passageways?
Probably diving in caves below 200 feet, probably 93. I started cave diving in 1990, and it all started off the coast of Palm Harbor. There was a collapsed cave system out there that we had dug on for many years. And one day we just, I just pushed a little bit further and it opened up. And of course, that's a whole nother story. But really, technology, we were talking prior to the show, and I'm just really fortunate, as well as other explorers, to be alive during this time when we have rebreather technology and helium. Breathing helium is really what allows us to go very deep. And battery technology. So, having the technology that's allowing us to kind of transcend and go further than any previous explorers had done in the past. And so many of these frontiers in Florida, previous explorers would get to a certain depth or even a certain distance and say, we can't go any further because, using conventional scuba gear, it just wasn't available.
So that's great. Around the early 1990s, how popular or prevalent was it to go deep down? How big was this field or industry, if you could even call it that? Yeah.
There was a lot of bravado. That's a musical term. And that was early 90s was really the apex of how deep can we go on air versus back then there weren't a lot of real functional trimix tables where you would introduce helium. And the problem with going deep on air is oxygen is your really limiting factor. As you go deeper and deeper on regular compressed air, your oxygen content gets higher and higher until the body, either based on time or exposure to oxygen, you'll literally seize up and pass out. And of course, when you pass out underwater, you breathe water and then you die. And so the early 90s was a real critical time in deep cave exploration where there was a group of individuals who were like, well, let's see how far we compress air versus another group of individuals who were saying, the technology's coming. Let's get on helium mixed gases and let's do that. So, and as a young diver in the 90s, I had people on both sides, whispering in my ear, like the devil and the angel, so I took air a lot deeper than anybody should ever take air, had an extremely close call, nearly ended my life. And then fortunately, a friend of mine named Steve Strasma, at that time, it was even difficult to, get trimix instruct. And he was like, look, if you're going to do this, we've got to substitute air for helium or you're just going to die, And so, it was a really pinnacle point in my, in my progression was moving from that whole deep air mindset to substituting helium. Of course, at that time, rebreathers and a lot of the technology wasn't available. So that's kind of when it started. I'd say there's a place called Eagle's Nest. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of body recoveries. Even our group has assisted quite a few times, including myself. And one of the deepest body recoveries in the United States took place there in the mid 90s. And it was a terrifically difficult body recovery. But once again, it was at that time where people were either pushing the limits with that whole kind of bravado, how deep can I go on air versus really using the correct amount of helium to do it safely and stuff. So,
okay. Now, before we pull up some of this footage, can you just kind of give us a time frame as to what depth was, where were people pushing the limits as far as depth in like the 20s with like the previous generation of scuba gear versus, scuba tanks and the stuff you're using?
Sure.
And the innovations you just talked about. For example, tell us, how deep were people diving in the 20s? How deep were they diving in the 90s? And what is it like today?
Well, Jacques Cousteau is infamous for really bringing scuba, that technology, and even in the late 30s, scuba in any capacity in the early 40s really was in still prenatal. You can't even say it was in its infancy. And when scuba came out, there were so many limitations. And then the Navy hadn't even really given us tables even tables used for recreational diving were created by bending literally intentionally bending U.S. sailors when scuba diving first came out. So, you know, in the early 50s,
When you say bending, do you mean subjecting them to the bends?
Correct. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
that's actually how many of the early tables were created, was through repetitive experiments on early Navy divers.
Throw someone down there and find out, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, back in the late 40s, early 50s, scuba was still in its infancy, so people were very reluctant to go much, and even the regulators themselves really couldn't go much deeper than about 80 feet. Those depths beyond 80 feet in open water environments were far beyond us. Cave diving, truly, its infancy began in dry caves in England and Weeki Hole, and then in the United States with early pioneers of cave divers that started cave diving in the early 70s. One of them lives close here, Paul Heinrich. You know, so in its infancy, cave diving was just guys just going into these openings and entrances. People had done it before, they had died, you know, and even creating the protocols back then for how to conserve your gas, how to wear your equipment, you know, in the early 70s, late 60s, was in its infancy. So, you know, the birth of cave diving as we know it now really was still evolving well into the mid 70s, early 70s. And it's at that time, it wasn't even considered a sport. I think I'd say in the late 80s and the early 90s is when cave diving was just beginning to be considered, you know, in a kind of a sport. You know, there were several systems in Florida where people could go and enjoy the cavern in the first 100 feet, you know, but still, I use the word frontiers. They knew that there were just boundless frontiers, deeper, further in, further back, currently even the world's record for the longest linear cave, that means one entrance, one exit, is still, 26,000 feet. So if you can imagine going in one opening, traveling 26,000 linear feet back, and then having to turn around and come back that far out. And battery technology for the development of diver propulsion, basically underwater scooters that pull us through. I mean, that has changed tremendously. And early divers at Wakulla Springs who were setting these records, they were building their own DPVs, diver propulsion vessels. They were building their own stuff. Even here with our group, in our decompression habitats, those bags we get into, we're kind of even designing our own technology, scrubbers to scrub out carbon dioxide, ways to stay warmer. We come back from a lot of these dives that you'll be showing shortly. And, our question isn't, how can we go further? The question is how can we stay comfortable? Because the reality is once you lose the ability to stay warm, stay hydrated, stay comfortable, the thought of continuing to go further and further, it's not something you think about. It's really comparable to mountain climbing, some of the higher peaks and stuff.
You can't just take the mouthpiece off and just take a deep gulp of water. You can't do that.
No, that would be bad. That would be bad. And unfortunately, a lot of things that have killed many divers in the past isn't really anything other than going unconscious underwater, even if their gear's not working. I mean, a lot of the fatalities you see these days are from divers with equipment that's delivering the wrong oxygen to air to helium mixture. And, once again, depending on the depth and the pressure you're at, oxygen is a deadly gas. The gases we use to explore can't even sustain life above 20 feet. We physically have to be at a certain depth before we can even start breathing them. That's called it's a hypoxic mixture versus a hyperoxic mixture. So a lot of your viewers, I mean, we could get lost in the minutia of some of the physics and the physical science that goes into it. But, for me, still, it's the frontier. I come back, and it's still going, or it's still going deeper. And we sit and we go, how can we remain comfortable and continue to go further and further and further? So, and that's been part of my passion, as well as, my friends and the group that I dive with for many years.
Wow.
Great. So let's kick off some of the footage. I have 3 here ready to go. We have Beyond the Beach, Phantom Springs, Deep Passage and Weeki Wachee Minas Tirith Director's Cut.
Okay.
Which would you like to start off with? Because the Weeki Wachee is the longest one, right?
Yeah, we could do a little bit of one that's called Beyond the Beach, and then I could explain a little bit about the previous explorers that were at this particular cave system, and then I'll leave it up to you. Phantom Springs actually isn't located in Florida.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay.
Yeah, that's a desert aquifer located in the extreme west end of Texas, believe it or not. So,
well, it might still be worth watching.
Sure,
to
absolutely.
see how they're different.
Absolutely.
Different geology. How different is the geology? Don't go into it too much, but
well, Phantom Cave is a thermal spring.
okay.
The water temperature in there is a constant 82 degrees.
Oh wow.
Versus your Florida caves will fluctuate between 68 and 73.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as erosion and the sculpting of caves, there's so many variables that go into that. But we could start out with the visit to
Beyond the Beach.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
All right.
You got to pull up your screen and then.
Yep. Here we go. You guys see this okay? Yep.
All good.
All right.
So as I was saying, in the early 90s and mid 90s, I wasn't involved with the exploration that's occurring at Weeki Wachee. Weeki Wachee is the longest roadside attraction in the United States. Florida, at one point, one of our major income factors here in Florida was we had Lion Country, Safari, Cypress Sunken Gardens, and there was just literally a myriad of roadside attractions that were happening in Florida. Well, I'll segue back. In the early 90s, divers using open circuit, which basically means conventional scuba, using it in configured for safe cave diving, had really pushed to the limits they could in a small spring located approximately 1/8 of a mile back from the main spring, the large spring where the mermaids perform on the side of US 19 in Weeki Wachee, Florida. And they'd gone as far as they could. They were in a massive tunnel called the River Alf, and it was a gentleman named Jeff Peterson and Dave Miner, and they had a group of support divers, Larry Kerr, and several other guys. So I feel like I should mention that. And they had, based on the opening being small and the exposure to oxygen for long periods of time, they had reached the distance and the depth that they could, logistically achieve. So here we are, exiting the small section of the cave, coming into what is considered the big Weeki Wachee stuff. This is just a small left-hand corner of a room called Middle Earth. The balcony is at 200 feet. The ceiling is at approximately 180, and the floor is at 268 feet. And this is the right wall of this massive room that was named by an early.
This is Florida, right?
This is correct. This is in Weeki Wachee, Florida, just to the west of Brooksville, and to the north of Hudson and south of Homosassa and Crystal River. We're approximately 5 miles from the coast, the Gulf Coast, here in this cave. So this scooter, or we call them DPV, is actually a version of a scooter that's literally made in a garage by a gentleman, named Rodney. And this is an earlier scooter using, lead acid batteries and stuff. This video was some of our earlier footage that we had taken in this cave system. But this is literally just one room. And then at the bottom of this room, headed out to the northeast is the River Alf Tunnel. We won't see that, but you can only imagine how divers must have felt when they discovered this room in the mid 90s. Once again faced with this incredible opportunity, but just daunted by logistically what they would need to bring and supply in order to explore this properly. We use dry suits because even at 72 to 73 degrees, which is where our water temperature is at Weeki Wachee, the body will become hypothermic after a very short period of time. So we don't use conventional scuba diving suits. We use basically, it's a shell suit. In fact, it's more closely related to a space suit. There's seals on the neck and the wrist, and you basically inject air in order to keep the atmosphere between the inside of the suit and your body at the same atmosphere the water is. So you're constantly adjusting this suit, and you can actually make bulkheads. So if you need to go to the bathroom, number one, you can. These days, we can actually run electrically heated undergarments, and so this is a series of rocks that have eroded out of the room called the Misty Mountains on the far side of the room. From corner to corner, the room is over 400 feet from corner to corner, 200 feet wide. It's just an amazing room. I can remember the first time I saw it. It's like being in outer space.
Yeah, it's breathtaking.
It really is. And all of our support divers, even now, they have to go through a series of dives, because progression, cave diving and progression is the number one thing, obviously training, that keeps people from, anytime you find yourself beyond your experience, progressively never training, hopefully, is when things go wrong. And so this would be the third dive. If you were a cave trained, Trimix certified diver and wanted to be a part of karst underwater research, this kind of represents the third dive that you would do. And then in front of Matt right here, that black abyss is literally the river Alf tunnel taken off. And so that's kind of the end of that dive. I think in the beginnings and ends, you'll see there's a smaller passage that leads in 2014. This system was connected to Weeki Wachee on a really cool dive. You see here where it says fossilized microbials. I can explain that. I'll try to make it entertaining for your viewers, but we've had major ice ages here in our world, but in class, we didn't learn about the hundreds of smaller ice ages that occurred. And so when we dive in sunken caves off the coast, we find microbials. They're undulating bacterial formations. They're still metabolizing oxygen and all types of stuff in the salt water. Well, the ones that are in Weeki were actually, came to being when these conduits were filled with salt water during one of these ice ages, and ocean levels rise. The panhandle of Florida has gone up and out of the Gulf and the Atlantic many, many times in the past. But these microbials that we see here in Weeki Wachee are almost like the rings of a tree, and what they are is just proof that these conduits throughout Weeki have been filled with salt water and provided that nutrition for microbials to form. And then when fresh water flushes back into these massive conduits, those microbials can't survive anymore, and so they're mineralized. So what we see on the floor, and you'll probably see in some of the subsequent videos, is just large piles of these microbials that formed when sea levels rose and fall. So it's amazing. I tell everybody, caves are time capsules. They're just amazing. They aren't subjected to sun and wind and weather, and some of the things you find in caves, they're just here on the corner. Once again, you can see some of these formations and stuff. They're just perfect time capsules, but you're moving through in a linear sense. A lot of times scientists will perform core samples, which is basically straight down. And you can see a lot from getting a core sample, but just imagine the information that you can collect from a linear, enlightenment of these geologic layers. And so this is representative of the passages that are heading back up to the chimney, or that coffin-sized passage at Twin Dees we have to get in and stuff. So we're heading back out now, and they just get smaller and smaller. And logistically, that's one of the real struggles we have, is we have to take all this equipment, and to get to the big section, we've got to get through this 1,300 linear feet of small cave. It's a little bit bigger here, but so this is directly under the chimney. at Twindies, this is a bag used for lifting up cars or planes or whatever, and we've inflated it and put it up on the ceiling. It's not the same anymore. We actually have built a bird cage around it, and we could put 3 people in it. But this is where we spend the majority of our time. This is the early version of this bag. So that was that.
Wow.
And Brett, I got a question.
Yes, sir.
I've seen from all the horror stories that I've heard about people cave diving and all that, as long as you guys stay at the top of it and you don't disturb the sediment, it doesn't cloud up, or is that different types of caves depending on where it's at?
That's a great question. That's another reason why there's so many fatalities in cave diving. You two guys could go and get adequate training for open water reef diving, and you could go virtually anywhere in the world. I mean, if you went to Australia, watch out for the great white sharks and don't pick up the little octopus that have spots on them, right? You learn things like that inherently. But in cave diving, you could go to Jenny and be in a passage where there's practically no silt. You make one turn, and the next thing you're in a part of the conduit that's filled with, clay and silt, and environments inside of a cave or from cave to cave, different caves, they change so rapidly. And so a lot of cave divers will get a lot of experience in 1 or 2 caves and go, I've got 100 cave dives. And then the next thing you know, they go to another cave down here or somewhere. And they're so far beyond that progressive experience of what they had in the other cave. So every time I dive, even after 30 years, I never allow my previous experiences to lead me or, provide me that extra, well, I'm okay. I've done this before. You really got to, years ago, I wrote an article called Renewing Your Mind as a Cave Diver, and you take that logistical training and you reapply that, but you just can't allow yourself to ever think that one cave is like the next and one experience is somehow going to guide you through the next situation. So
yeah, you
sorry
can't get too
long-winded explanation.
Too cocky. And one more question for you.
Yeah.
And I wanted to reiterate that this is Florida, because everybody's like, oh, there's nothing underneath Florida. It's too flat, it's too shallow, whatever it is. How important is it to be studying these cave systems and be going through these cave systems to map them out? What importance does that serve for the people?
It's tremendously important. I've seen so much of our watershed change even in 30 years. And I'm sure my great grandkids are going to go to some of these springs and say, look at the pretty green water. And I'll go, well, when I was a kid, it used to be as clear as Stolich vodka. Some of the practices even now that we're doing here in Florida, I tell a lot of people there's only 120 miles of land that keep us from being an island. And I believe me, if we lived on an island, we would be treating this landmass a lot differently, than we are. If you take into consideration all the caves and spaces that have been explored, that still represents barely 1% of the encapsulated systems that will never be found or explored. And throughout Florida, linear cave, like river, geologists don't like it when you say underground river. There isn't as many linear caves. To understand that in Florida, as water moves through our aquifer, it moves at different rates. At a lot of our bigger springs, you'll find water that's a day old, a week old, months old, and then some of that water's 200 or more years old. So as our aquifer is a water table, but water is constantly moving through this porous limestone. And then every now and then it'll get to a creek, and then the creek will turn into a little river. Then the river will turn, and the next thing you know, it's coming out at a spring and stuff like that. But mainly what in the karstic parts of our aquifer, you'll have large voids. You hear these stories about well drillers in Orlando and all around Florida. They'll be drilling down and all of a sudden just go and hit a void. Those things do exist. That's not a fairy tale. It doesn't mean that there's a massive river moving underground there. It means there's a massive chamber that probably hasn't been disturbed in years. There are documented situations here, especially on the coast, where they've drilled several core samples and disrupted the hydrostatic pressure. Even when you build a house, the roof holds up, protects you. And when you perforate the ground too many times in a lot of these areas where you have karst and caves, you disrupt the actual water pressure. And there was a place just north of Brooksville where they did a bunch of drilling, came out the next day, and massive sinkholes had formed and everything else, which is part of what we do here at karst. It's important to understand that surfaced karst formations don't exist all around Florida. And where they do, it's just as important as a spring. If there's a sinkhole that's really relevant to water moving expeditiously underwater, it's not always good practice just to fill it in with shit, and discard it, because, the reason a lot of our springs have incredibly high nitrates and are filled with lingvia is not because of what's happening where the water comes out. It's what's happening back in the localized aquifer where water's going in quickly. In certain parts of Florida, it takes the water, once again, it has to go through sand and mud and sedimentary layers. But there are parts of Florida where it'll rain and that water will be in our drinking layer instantaneously.
Wow.
Those are the areas that somehow our geologists have identified, but they're not going to any great extent to really protect. Once again, protecting springs is great, but if you can't protect the localized recharge, then the quality of the water at your springs just isn't going to be reflective of that. So yeah, I could talk on that all night long. But.
Yeah, and they're pulling millions of gallons. I mean, all these big corporations are pulling millions and millions of gallons per day, unregulated. So it doesn't really matter to them. They're going to milk it as long as they can. I don't know if you've seen that documentary Phosphate. Have you seen that documentary?
I'm familiar with it. Yeah, I have to be really careful. The same organizations that allow me to document these areas are the ones that do a lot of that research. But I will say this. There are many documented cases. I'll give you a perfect example. Zephyr Hills bottled water at Crystal Spring. They were only, believe it or not, a lot of people they're pulling more than they're supposed to. The reality is the geologists and scientists will go in and say, you can take this much. And most companies don't. But at Crystal Springs, the moment they even tried to go to half of what they could, they started pulling up water from a deeper source in our aquifer where there were sulfates and basically putrid water. Our drinking water comes from a very thin lens, and scientists will do core samples to substantiate basically how water moves from a deeper part and is filtrated and gets to a shallower part. So Zephyr Hills bottled water used to only come from Crystal Springs, but when they moved up to still regulated amounts, the water went bad. And so they had to pick approximately 5 other springs in the state of Florida so they could meet, those things and stuff. If you're going to take bottled water, the best place still is to take it to where it comes to the surface. In my opinion, I still don't see, the need of it. I mean, you can still purify water and keep certain minerals in it so that, electrolytes or whatever, it's good for you. But it's just, it doesn't make sense.
Can I ask?
Sure.
Can I ask you something, Brett?
Yes.
How often do you find yourself drinking Florida spring water from the
all
source?
The time.
From a rock source?
Well, I'm 80 years old.
No, you're not.
Often I'll be down in Weeki Wachee and I'll close the mouthpiece of my rebreather, take it out, and go gunk, 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 and just drink.
Oh wow!
I told you could do that.
So can I ask you, when you're in the Ministereth,
yes,
can you drink that?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Oh my God!
Without a doubt, I've had many drinks. I've had many drinks of water. Prior to getting to Ministereth is Mount Doom, and that's where we actually drop to 407 feet before we come back to 375.
So if we watch that other video,
sure.
How much are we going to be seeing a different room, a different location?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So
did you have a chance to see the map I sent you? So if you want to show that later, you can.
Yeah, I'll bring that up afterwards. Let's queue up the that next one. I think it's about 14 minutes or about there.
Yeah, and feel free to cut it off when you want to. But yeah, we can walk through it.
I mean, it's amazing. Every second is worth.
Thank you.
It's priceless. It's great. Let me cue that up right here.
When are we going to start talking about the aliens and stuff, Narco? Are we going to bring that up on the later half?
No.
The mermaids and stuff? No?
Well, once we watch, I do want to ask you about the strangest things you've ever? So think about it. Well,
it is still my fantasy to find a unidentified spacecraft half dissolved out of limestone in a massive passage. Believe me, I want for that. I really do.
Well, how about just this? Do you ever see formations that look man-made, designed, or?
When I was younger, I would be stunned and go, "That's just an impossibility." But as I've gotten older, I even recently on the History Channel, a friend of mine, Michael Barnett, and some of the guys went down. They found these massive white obelisks of limestone that were clearly man-made, and they were very excited. And then they swam over to one wall, and the anchor line was going up and down because of the waves, and the anchor line was cutting out perfect rectangular blocks of limestone. And so they realized that all these blocks of limestone that were on the floor that could have been part of the Bimini Road were actually just made from fishermen dropping their anchors and having those nylon ropes cutting into the limestone. But I have seen stuff over the years that's just difficult to explain. But fortunately, and I've gone to many people and said, how did this happen? There's one system in North Florida that has these massive, they look like whale bones, but they're literally dolomite formations covered in goethite. And they look like massive bones, but they're literally just leftovers from an ocean floor that the water has eroded away, where the limestone was more soluble. The dolomite formations from the previous, millennia ocean floor are now eroded out of rock. And I go, well, that makes sense. But I'm always very subjective. I don't always, just because a person has initials after their name, I don't go, okay, that's got to be what it is.
Yeah, because it's like looking at clouds. You want to believe, so it's like, wow, that really looks like a whale bone or elephant bone or whatever it is. Sure. So you start to see it in your mind.
Yep.
All right, guys. This is Weeki Wachee. You guys see my screen?
Yep.
Alrighty.
Whoa.
This dive begins approximately 7,600 feet from the Twin Dees opening and 6,000 feet from the Weeki Wachee opening that we currently can't even dive due to the tremendous flow that comes out of the bottom of the main spring at Weeki Wachee. And once again, what you're seeing here in this layering is just, I'm not even going to try to make a word, but these are just different. Oh, imagine the ocean floor one year when you have a cataclysm. It's just layer. Once again, if you think of the layers of a tree, but think of the layering of our, Earth's early ocean floors, especially here in Florida. And so what you're seeing here is in the matrix of conduits that start the recharge far, far back from Weeki Wachee, more towards the Pitlakuchi Swamp. What we're in here is what would be considered the river part, where the water has accumulated, and you're seeing all these different layers. The brown is more representative of an iron-rich layering. And so we're coming up into one of the first super rooms in this new section. This is called the Sirius Room.
Wow.
So we're just coming up the Sirius Room here. And you can see the left wall. And usually when we explore these
my God.
Now, Andrew is on top of the hill, and Matt and I are easily 150 feet away. And this pile of rock kind of represents the center of the room. And so we're just circling here. And once again, you can see all these layers. Some of this rock on the wall is more pliable and soft, where other.
Now, Brett, if I can cut in right there, we kind of see like a black and white cookie difference between the top layer on the wall right there.
Correct.
And the whiter layer beneath it.
Yep.
Now, within those, there's probably hundreds of different layers, right?
Correct.
But what does that main difference indicate to us?
The layer really indicates, I guess, just to give you an example, in the Bahamas, when we explore, we see a lot of red Sahara dust from when a long, long time ago there were tremendous winds pushing out of Africa, and we'll see a lot of encapsulated Sahara dust there.
Wow.
You see some of it, but generally what you're seeing is that that lower layer is softer. That browner layer is more, as Dr. Pitkin would say, fractal or brittle. And it just really is, and it is just comparable to what was happening on our planet, in the ocean floor, in things that were happening in our atmosphere, and deposits that were coming down to the ocean floor at that time. We see, crinoids, lots of microscopic life and stuff that's literally just encapsulated. And a lot of this breakdown on the floor, believe it or not, if you rise above that more fractal layer, it gets soft again. And the thing is this is a good example, is as water was eroding through this room, as water, when we were all kids, have you guys ever pushed a garden hose down into the dirt, turn the hose on? And then just push the garden hose down into the ground? Well, this is kind of an example. So we've passed the main lead to our right, and Andrew and Matt pushed into this lead. Now, once again, this rock here, when we were first exploring Weeki, this type of rock we called White Death. Yes, because as you can see, that stuff on the floor is just like talcum powder. It's very, very soft, and not you don't see a lot of tiny, once again, you guys mentioned coquina or any type of stuff like that. Whatever was going on in the layering of our sedimentary layers of the ocean floor or Gulf at that time, I can't say for certain. So we're moving into a room now called the funnel room. Matt's taking the lead. That
looks like fun.
There. Yeah, and as you can see, there is flow kicking out of here. It's mainly coming up. You wouldn't imagine being in these massive passages and going through this kind of like Brian K. Cook in the Bahamas. What does Brian call that? He calls it a drain. And so now we're coming up into a formation called the funnel room. It's a massive room. The walls are incredibly high. And so you ask yourself, well, man, how does this room fall? How does this room form? Well, believe it or not, at the far side of the funnel room on the surface, there's a sink. The sinkhole doesn't go, you can't swim in it and go down, but there's definitely a higher content of tannic acids and carbonic acids that are filtering. Once again, I told you guys, some parts of karst topography allow water in quicker. Well, in this area of our landmass, we're seeing a lot more acidity coming in from this sinkhole. And because of it, this fluctuation of water has now made this massive room. We get to the far side, and there it is, and it just goes boom, and it ends. Because, as water was moving, once it finds another way, then some of the ways it carved out earlier, water are kind of abandoned, and so as massive as this room was, we literally just followed it right down to where it pinched off. Andrew and Matt did.
The path of least resistance. And also, can I add, is what type of, or can I ask, what type of, is there any wildlife at all in these?
Yes.
Great question.
Yes. Yeah. So without a real proper synthesis, we at photo or chemo or whatever it is, we have small crustacea. We have isopods and amphipods. These are things that are literally, 3/16, and then, you have albino crayfish, but generally you don't, and those aren't very large in this system, and they all live off each other. Sometimes if there's a bacterial content that comes in from like a surface sink, they live there. But in the parts of our cave here at Weeki where there's no entrances and it's really far back, you just don't see much of it. You start seeing it when you get closer to the surface, but without a real synthesis of any kind, as big as these spaces are, it'd be like in a science fiction novel. You'd expect to see some gigantic creature come flying out of the darkness, but without a proper food chain developing from some type of synthesis, you just don't see it. And we have worked with several biologists, because in Florida, what they've done, which would be fascinating to you guys, is if we're doing DNA testing on these small crustacea, and we can literally, by DNA testing, we can find out how they've moved through the aquifer over the millennia. So if I take an isopod from this cave and compare it to an isopod from North Florida, we can literally ascertain where it started and how long it, in a sense, scientifically, how long it took to migrate through that porous aquifer. So I'm not a scientist, but some of that research is amazing. So now we're back in the Sirius room, and instead of going straight, we're ducking under here, and we're heading towards the current end of the line at Weeki Wachee. Weeki Wachee is a strong magnitude spring, one of the biggest in the state, next to Wakulla and Manatee. And but anyways, we got back here. Matt and Andrew did. I was actually in Palau. We had found this new section. We had found this new section of cave, and they called me while I was in Palau doing work, and they were like, "Hey, we're your friends, but do we have to wait till you get back?" And I was like, "No, go ahead." I don't regret it. So now here we are at the bottom of an incredible room called the Unknown. The gas you see coming out of our suit, even when you go deeper and come up, due to Boyle's law, when you go deeper and you come up even into shallower sections, that gas has to expand, even though we're on fully closed circuit rebreathers. So now we're literally at the bottom of this room, and it comes up. This room, from where we enter it here to the far side, I would say is nearly over 400 feet across, and just this massive breakdown. And as we reach the top of this incredible breakdown in this room, you can feel the Weeki Wachee River water just coming up through the breakdown. And for 2 years, we've been trying to navigate around. You can just see it's just going up and up and up. For 2 years, we've been trying to find a way to get around this breakdown. The same surface depression that I described from the funnel room is the one that's even closer to this one. The two rooms are kind of offset. They're relatively close to each other. And anyways, fortunately, we've found a way around this massive breakdown. This is called the saddle, which is kind of where the breakdown gets close. And then, as you can see, it opens back up. We found a way around it, but now we're literally almost 10,000 feet out, 368 feet deep, probing through very small things. Wow. But this is one of my favorite rooms in the system as well.
So, Brett, if I could ask you,
sure.
Who came up with these names? Who comes up with most of these names? I'm seeing a bit of mythology, Egyptian mythology, Tolkien. Yeah. So where do these names come from?
Originally, the explorers at Twin Dees started the Tolkien names, and our followers and a lot of our friends like that. These two rooms were named by Andrew and Matt. Generally, the first explorer to document the room is the one who names it. Nice. Dr. Pitkin will still use Tolkien names, but he's gotten a little tired of that. So the Sirius room and the Unknown are names that he named, and he's named rooms Revelation, Space. He comes up with good names. The Prehistoric room. Land of the Dead Who Aren't Dead, the Not Dead Yet room.
What was the inspiration for Sirius room? Is that the only Egyptian?
The only Egyptian. I'd have to ask Andrew sometime. I think constellation. It was more based on the constellation. I think.
Okay.
Than the Egyptian part. But so here we are circling this room. And that's, if you see down there, that lead dropping down, that's where we've gone back down. Now we're circling back under this massive breakdown. And under the breakdown, it's kind of, there's calcite welded. And, we're trying to find a way. We have other projects, but this is really, as explorers and even our team members, when you find a frontier like this, you can't just walk outside and go, there's probably a new Mount Everest over there, or a mountain. But the most amazing thing, a geologist told me many years ago, they said, we don't believe that there's openings big enough in the aquifer to move from the top of the 300-foot range through the 400-foot range. Once again, it was a scientific kind of accepting based on core samples that there weren't even openings big enough in our aquifer between that 300-foot range and that 400-foot range for us to do what we've done. And when we did it, it wasn't like I went back to the scientists and went, in your face. I mean, I was so excited, but that's the thing about our aquifer is they say, hydrogeologic formulas are more complex than rocket science. You can do core sampling all over a given area, but the thing is the underwater morphology of our state it's just, to a certain extent, it's not calculable, and it's an average. And I think what concerns me most, I have to be very careful once again, is we talk about taking water from the aquifer. My biggest concern right now is the water that's being added back to our aquifer. It's becoming it has been for decades now. They'll treat our sewage almost to the point of drinking standards, and they'll pump millions and millions and millions of gallons of treated sewage into our deep aquifer. Because scientists believe that there are sedimentary layers that will filter and separate our deeper aquifer from our shallow aquifer. Once again, what we're seeing in these videos is the layer we drink from, and as expansive and big as it seems, it's a very small layer, generally below 80 feet and above 400 in that range. Anything you start going below those depths, you start running into sulfide-rich waters and iron bacteria and things like that. So
would that be? Sorry.
Yep. No, go ahead.
Would that be similar to like the black hole of Andros, that that bottom layer where it's too much acidity or bacteria or whatever it is to be safe to go into?
Yeah, the oxygen deficient environments that happen in a lot of our big ocean sinks and sinks are basically cause and effect of sulfide bacteria due to lack of oxygen. There's not really water movement. But in Florida, our deep aquifer is a saltwater aquifer. It's heated, believe it or not. It's hot water. There are places in Florida where, once again, it comes up and it does make its way to the surface. And the thing I think that concerns me most about Florida is this is the white room. I call it Gondor.
Yeah, that's amazing.
That was the end of this room represents the end of the Weeki Wachee exploration.
That is like a Grand Canyon underwater.
And Brett, do you guys have to special order your suits for your guys' massive balls in order to get in there? Like, what do you guys have to do?
I always tell everybody, I said, if they used to be big, I don't know, but now they're just little titanium BBs now. As I was saying, there's precedence in Florida that shows that deep water injection, they've tried. There's a reason we don't do desalination in Florida. It's because that hypersaline water, when they've tried to inject it into the deeper aquifer, it has found ways. People's wells get salty. They can't put it in the Gulf because it would kill our Gulf. It's not affordable to ship it over to the other coast. And so there's precedents after precedents that show that in some cases, there are ways deep aquifer water makes it into the shallow aquifer quicker, just like there are ways on the surface where surface water makes it into our aquifer quicker. And my biggest concern is now in Miami, Orlando's adapted this for a very long time. They're just injecting millions and millions of gallons of water into our deeper aquifer. And it's my fear that eventually all of our beautiful springs in Florida are going to be green, in the future. People just move here more and more. And like I said, I think it's a practice that has to be done. But, once again, if precedent shows that in many cases there are ways that our aquifer, it's not a consistent thing, but it's an amazing place. And I've just been so fortunate to be a part of it and stuff. So that's our last 4K video of Weeki. I think this next season in 24, we're going to be doing 4K 360-degree footage, so you guys can see the largest passages in Weeki Wachee we can't film. They're too big. As big as that might seem, believe it or not, there are places down a tunnel we call the mega tunnel that you could fly a jumbo jet down. but we don't have.
Whoa, okay. Let's slow down.
Can I show something really quick that I found
Sure.
on the Facebook group? Because we're showing these videos of these massive, huge rooms. Well, what you're not showing is the tight spaces that you have to get through in order to get to these rooms, like something like this, which I for a while was obsessed with going to the lesser known springs here in Florida and going down towards the hole where the water comes out and kind of like looking around and stuff. But I would never be able to, you would never find me here. That's what I'm saying. And you guys have a whole bunch of pictures. Make sure to check out his Facebook group, Karst Underwater Research. Make sure to follow them. I'm gonna give them a follow now.
Absolutely.
You guys have a whole bunch of pictures, and just so people can get the scale of how big these systems are. And literally, you could be sitting at your house, and some dude could be swimming underneath. Brett could be swimming underneath your house right now because these systems just go everywhere. It's really fascinating.
That road in that picture is 3 lanes north and south, with a 30-foot median and 2 30-foot medians to the left and to the right. And the passage that moves to your left and down, and some of those passages are still bigger than that entire thoroughfare.
So this is the 6-lane highway that you were referring to.
Yeah.
And how long would this 6-lane highway run at its longest kind of straight away?
Those sections, we've got about 3,000 feet of cave that is bigger than that 6-lane highway. Wow. But it's just nearly impossible to film. Even when we were in the top of the Sirius room, Andrew was situated in the middle and was filming Matt and I from 150 feet away. There are sections of the mega passage where it's over 200 feet across and nearly 100 feet high. And so,
That's wild.
But further back to like I said, something else I was telling a friend of mine is, I think one thing we've also learned in Florida is early in the development of Florida, they believed all of our water migrated from the Okeechobee in Georgia, right? Or is that Okefenokee? Sorry, Okefenokee. And what we're learning more and more in Florida is we have localized recharge areas. There's a water table, which is really representative of our aquifer, is a water table. And throughout that water table in Florida, there are fractures and fissures and rooms where water moves slowly and moves fast, depending on what's happening here on the surface. But, what we're learning, and is most important here in Florida now, is for a lot of our beautiful springs, there's localized recharge areas. The main recharge area of Weeki occurs, if this map is orientated, up is north, down is south, and right is east, and left is west. The main recharge of Weeki goes out to the southeast, and you can see, that the water quality at Weeki, I think, predominantly is good because the Pitlakuchi Swamp is where a lot of the water goes into the ground and stuff. But that place will always have a special place in my heart, Weeki, and we'll see what happens there.
And this is a big area, I'm sure, right? Miles, probably, but imagine the entire state, these other systems that probably haven't been discovered. Because when I was looking up videos of divers and stuff, it would be like this random little pond in the middle of nowhere. And as soon as they would dive in, it'd be an entire different world underneath that one little pond that you would never expect it to be under there,
Well, the deepest underwater caverns in the world are actually, back in the early 80s, are only located 3 miles to the east of Weeki Wachee, believe it or not.
Wow.
They were called dipolars. They're currently closed. The property is owned by the Boy Scouts of America, and they're massive, massive rooms that store water. Now, when we go into them and go around the bottom, we can't feel water moving, but we know that they contribute heavily to the water at Weeki Wachee and stuff like that. And I wish we had more time to talk. I was talking to our mutual friend Spencer about some of the even the places that aren't bigger, but up in North Florida, we were talking about Swanee Spring, Sulphur Springs, and all the different springs that people used to visit for health purposes and all kinds of stuff. But
what about Wakula? Because when I look online, Wakula some claim is the the largest, deepest, highest magnitude spring in the world?
Oh, yeah, it's definitely up there. Right up until about 7 years ago. Sorry, I'm at my daughter's house. Her cat was interested in the computer. Wakulla was the biggest. So the largest underwater cave in the world is a cave system in Mexico. But there are many, many openings throughout that cave. So in cave diving, once again, where you come in and where you get out, they're the same, and there's no other openings. For a very long time, Wakulla, the connection between Turner and Wakulla was long. It was like 47,000 feet until they connected it. They were out in a section called Q Tunnel. And then the world's record for longest linear underwater passage occurred near Swanee Park in North Florida by Falmouth. And it was a few thousand feet longer. But once again, a lot of these systems in North Florida will go dark for years at a time, and then once became because of rain and groundwater usage. Another huge factor in North Florida now is agricultural use, and it's not even agriculture that stays here in Florida. A lot of our big Florida family farms are leasing their property to conglomerate farming, and those conglomerate farming companies are benefiting from unlimited water usage. And so a lot of our springs in North Florida are just not what they used to be. You talk about bottled water, you can imagine those huge round sprinklers. I mean, just millions and millions of gallons of water a day. And, you know, these families deserve to lease that land to farmers, but I have strong feelings, you know, once again, to a certain extent, is why should the water rights of our historical farmers be available to conglomerate farming, where much of that, you know, industry isn't even staying here in Florida? And so, but, you know, but mainly what Karst does is we document these things. You know, we can map and document and say, here's what it looks like now. Here's what it looked like back then. Obviously, something's going on. So hopefully some of the research we do can assist scientists with that methodology.
Great.
Awesome.
That's wonderful, Brett.
All night long.
So
Make sure to follow them on Facebook.
So, Brett, I had a question. The state of Florida, is the state of Florida on your guys' side? Or are you working with the government? How much, you know, does it shift depending on the whose cabinet is in charge? And
no, they definitely work with us. We're a group that it's a physical science. Once again, you know, I think the only way individuals like you and Juan, I mean, it's excellent to share this with you. That's been my number one goal. You know, when you come out from a dive and you go to your friends and go, "Oh, you should have seen it. It's this and that," and everyone goes, "Yeah, right." You know, you don't. We live in a time, your generations, plural, that if you can't see something, the desire to protect it isn't inherent. You know, no one really wanted to protect baby fur seals until they saw a video of a baby fur seal getting clubbed over the head. I mean, that sounds awful, but I think the best way to protect a resource these days is to document it and bring it to people who can't even, you know, they're like, no, there's no way. There's no way. That's underneath my feet. That's what I'm walking on every day. And, you know, thanks to guys like you, we can bring these types of images to the world and say, listen, this is a resource that's changing, and it's changing because of the way we are allowing, you know, our agriculture and our fertilizing and our water usage to continue. And I just don't believe that you're ever really going to make a huge change till people can relate to what you're seeing and doing and stuff. That's a younger version of me.
Got the beard going on there, bro. Nice.
Yeah, but let's
so
see.
this is one of the narrow entrances.
This
right?
is Twin D's, and this is Michael Barnett. He's a published writer for Florida Shipwrecks and also a cave diver. Now you can see Michael doesn't have any gear on his back. He's got a weight belt on and he's pushing his tanks in front of him. But all that gear you're seeing in these videos, the rebreathers and the bottles and the scooter have to go down this. We used to call it the coffin passage because when you're sitting in there, it's about the size of a coffin.
Yeah.
But everything has to go down this limestone chimney before we can put it back on and then make that traverse, those thousands and thousands of feet to get to where you saw in that video. And it's nothing that I could do or any one of our explorers could do without a team of highly qualified guys. There's Derek Ferguson there, and it's their job to move all of our equipment down this little hole and into that, around that orange bag and stuff. As I said, the flow at Weeki Wachee, I doubt we'll ever dive at the Weeki Wachee head springs in my lifetime again. The opening at 170, 160 feet is about the size of a breakfast table. And currently there's 200 cubic feet of water a second coming out of that opening at Weeki Wachee proper, the mainspring.
So it's pressurized. Right,
that's absolutely right. Yeah.
Wow.
And believe it or not, this all started on one of the worst droughts that Florida's ever experienced back in the early 2000s. That opening that now has 200 cubic feet of water a second at Weeki Wachee, not here in this video, was all the way down to 98 cubic feet of water a second. Tampa was literally on a timer, much like Vegas has been, where they literally had a timer as to when it would be reaching critical levels of water, and getting water. So anyways, it lets out into a room at 40 feet, and we put it all back together and make our way. But it's not all about Big Cave. Oh, there's the real small part.
Oh, dude, right there's no way.
At any given time, though, we have two separate breathing sources, redundancy.
Wow. And I just want to know the original Florida man that was like, you know what? That's a nice hole. I want to go in that hole, and I want to see what's on the other side.
I got to give credit to Paul Heinrich for that. He's still around.
We got to get him on the show because that guy's balls must be huge. Because, I mean, who would think of anything like this? I mean, look at that.
There he is coming out. There it is. I think he's got my bottle with all that PVC on it.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, that orange habitat now is situated much better. We have a carbon dioxide scrubber in it. Most of our dives and dive time is spent in that orange bag, off-gassing and allowing our bodies to naturally remove the saturated helium and nitrogen. And then you got to go back up. But, I constantly tell our team it's not about being deep or far back in the cave. Water in general is not a media that gives a crap. You don't got to be 300 feet deep and 10,000 feet back. I told him, I said, do not take that chimney for granted. I said, because, it's like we were discussing earlier in the program, water don't care. Water's like a honey badger. If something goes wrong, you're going to die, so you've got to, approach it the right way. But yeah.
Do we have time for questions at all, Brett?
Oh, I'm fine. Yeah, I'm good.
There's 800 and something people in the chat right now. 843 people. We could take some questions.
Yeah.
If you want to ask questions for Brett, put them in all caps, and we'll try and get to as many as we can.
I'll let you guys read them because I have two separate sets of glasses. So you just let me know.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
If you want
and thanks for this opportunity, guys. I appreciate it.
Oh, well.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Brett. Let's see, guys.
Someone said asking about his treasure hunting and Spanish job.
Yeah, somebody said something about treasure hunting, Brett, earlier.
Yes.
Your treasure hunting adventures. Can you talk about that?
I will tell you, we located areas with a potential using a technology. I've signed so many non-competes and non-disclosures. And not that I have wealth to be sued for, but it's not something that unfortunately I'm allowed to talk about right now. I will say there are multiple sites in Florida currently where they know there are wrecks of antiquity. It have nothing to do with the company I was working for, but unfortunately, because of less legislation that was even brought into existence in the Clinton administration, Spain, there's so much litigation.
So even Spain today, like
even
the
Spain today,
nation
even
of
after
Spain,
correct.
Still has their
Correct.
paw in the mix.
One of the richest galleons
Illuminati
is
confirmed.
One of the richest galleons is located off Honduras in 800 feet of water.
Yeah.
And Spain was going to come over and start salvaging it with ROVs. And Honduras said, if you do, your ships are going to go to the bottom.
Wow.
So, but yeah, I mean, right now I'm familiar with at least 2 ships of antiquity that we know of in Florida that people are not excavating because they're not telling Spain where they are.
Yeah. Now, I'll tell you, in my documentary, The Saxor Stones, I interviewed 2 divers that were on the AquaQuest looking for Atlantis in the Bahamas and the Caribbean with the Edgar Cayce Foundation. And they also found a French shipwreck, and it had copper ore. It sunk with, hundreds and hundreds of pounds of copper ore. Well, when they went down there, Brett, it was all gold ore, and it had been registered or filed as copper ore for similar reasons, so that to keep France, not getting involved in some litigation here in Florida. That was actually North Carolina or South Carolina, that one. But
yeah, there's one off the coast in Florida right now where they've excavated it down to French cannons several times, and the Spanish basically say, well, they're French cannons, but they were on a Spanish galleon. So once again, entering into litigation immediately is what the Spanish government wants to do. I mean, the thing is if you take the price of gold as it sits in a pawn shop compared to gold antiquity, it's 8 times more expensive, antiquity versus just regular gold. So you can imagine, but that's all, as Forrest Gump would say, that's all I have to say about that.
Okay. So now this question right here, how does one get started in this sort of diving? This was a question I was going to ask you, so I'm glad someone asked it.
There's more mainstream. I don't like using the word sport, cave diving. I mean, the training is out there. My only suggestion as a person that's done it for 30 years is get the best training you can, number one. If you ever feel like you don't want to ever continue to progress, I mean, even at Jenny or some of the more what people call benign caves, they're not. I mean, you could be on a beautiful big piece of line in Jenny Springs and make a turn, and I've used this dialogue in documentaries before, make a left or right turn and you're in hell. So, if your aspirations are just to experience cavern and cave diving, my suggestion is, get your scuba, get your advanced scuba. A cavern course is an excellent course for wreck diving. Anybody that takes a cavern course will learn more in that cavern course, how to run a reel, how to maintain positive buoyancy, how to manage your gas. And then, once again, just be progressive. The training is available, is alluring as some of our videos and some of the maps and things you might see. It just progression is the most important thing. There are some people that have an inherent talent and a mindset, there isn't a physical prowess that allows you to be a cave diver. What really it is, some firefighters can enter into a burning building where other people like, screw that, the burnings, if there's a cat in there, screw it. It's your basic ability as a cave diver to not do what your body, wants you to do. When you want to freak out, when you want to go, oh shit, at that time, you literally just have to dial it down and compress. And that type of reactionary, mindset sometimes takes a very long time. I've been in the water with, cave divers that have a pedigree and will lose visibility or something will happen to the line and they just go, and I'm kind of like, oh my gosh, so progression, do it for the right reasons and be progressive. You may end up, but it's an amazing sport. It really is. It really is. Some of the caves in Cancun and around the world are just amazing, but just get good instruction the best you can and be progressive.
Okay. Have you found evidence of ancient human life in those caves? And I'll put in any caves, artifacts, etc. Okay.
Yeah. In Yucatan in the early 90s, before it became popular, we were finding pre-Columbian stuff down there. Here in Florida, we've located several times indigenous people remains. Most of them are just drowning victims. I've never, we used to believe there was sacrifice and all that, but a scientist once told me that if a rock fell every 200 years, it would account for the rock pile in the middle of the room. Well, a lot of times these ancient individuals we find in caves around the world, you can apply that same theory. If one person drowned in that hole every 200 years, it would accommodate what we found. There used to be some indigenous remains in Manatee Springs. A lot of those times you find those things during sinkholes and stuff like that. Most of what we find, I think it's Pleistocene. Upright sloth, saber-toothed cat, mainly dugong. Basically, your ancient manatee. We'll see a lot of. Usually not below 160 feet, but right up to about 160 feet in vertical cave, you can see ancient dugong or ancient manatee ribs, predominantly ribs and hip sockets. A lot of the manatee skull structure was just too thin to support solution into limestone. So, I mean, we've seen entire rib cages of dugong and stuff. And
in the walls?
In the wall.
Of caves?
Yeah, in
Wow.
the wall. Which, once again, you're 160 feet. And if you see a dugong rib cage in the wall, you just have to say, that was the ocean floor at one time, where a lot of people are like, no.
Wow.
That's wild.
Okay. So here's a one. Do you ever see microplastics, or I'll embellish this a little. Do you ever see pollution down there? Like just downright pollution, like a bag of Doritos or microplastics, stuff like that?
Once again, you'll see it more when you have more openings in a linear conduit. I've seen a lot of micropollution at Manatee, obviously, because you got multiple sinkholes. But once you make it past ancient or, sinkholes that will usually dissipate unless you're in a system that siphons and sucks with tidal fluctuation. When we were following up with mapping in Sulphur Springs, which is located in downtown Tampa, I was through 3,800 feet and a McDonald's straw just went. And a few minutes later, I know this is disgusting, but a feminine product went floating by. But we have multiple sinkholes, historical sinkholes. That entire part of Tampa was designed around.
Wait, did you say Tampon Bay?
Exactly. But then Tampa itself, all that part of Tampa, Sulphur Springs, the early part, it was designed around redirecting stormwater into sinkholes. That's how they designed it. And the problem is now is so much of the housing in the same areas now, they'll run the water through a surface kind of filtration pond and stuff like that. But that localized aquifer in the Sulphur Springs area it just kind of gave up on it.
Okay.
I don't know if you guys ever heard of the Federal Water Protection Act, which is more or less moot now, but Florida as a whole back in the day saw that federal law coming into being, and Florida enacted a quick law called Historical Drainage Ditch Act, because if not, when the Federal Water Protection Act came into being, without that Historical Drainage Ditch Act, there would have been a lot of reparations that would have had to been made, but Florida got around it. So even in Orlando, Apopka, especially up in that area, you still see tremendous amounts of storm water, brake dust, oil that's directed to natural sinkholes.
Mm-hmm.
Still happens.
Now, wonderful. Now,
I guess
were the caves in Mexico very similar? Now, I like to add to this.
Sure.
You mentioned Cancun. Is most of the subterranean waterways in the Yucatan area?
Yucatan all the way back to
Peninsula?
Guatemala, you just see a really higher concentration. The limestone's tremendously porous and close to the surface, and you have so many surface entrances, which, once again, the moment you have a surface entrance into a localized aquifer, you're increasing the amount of acidity that, in addition to the actual, hydrology making, water moving and making conduit. When you add the acidity from hundreds of surface features, then you get a matrix. And so in Cancun, Merida, throughout those areas, what you end up with, a lot of people will talk about the meteorite subsequently assisting with that, but you have this massive plateau of close limestone with openings everywhere. Salt water also really contributes to the degradation of limestone. And so it's an amazing cave there. And so during several of our ice ages, a lot of that cave was very dry. I can't really say exactly, what humans, indigenous people were living there. We've proven over and over again that, there was lots of worship, the underworld that was going on there, Shabalba, but a lot
What's
of
Shabalba?
Shabalba is basically a group of deities that the Mayans worshipped, that they believe they had the keys to the underworld, and that they existed in these cenotes and caves. And so, there was a heavy belief that people were sacrificed into these things. And I believe to a certain extent they were. In the early 90s, we found pre-Columbian Spanish skulls. I mean, if you see a Mayan skull, it's very small. A lot of them have had modeling.
Okay. So when you say pre-Columbian Spanish skull,
yeah,
what does that mean?
Well,
because Columbus was the first European.
Yeah.
Or are you saying like European-looking skulls?
There are still skulls that have been found in some of the cenotes in Mexico that are of Spanish orientation. The jaws, the teeth, everything, and they know it. And they're still studying it. I mean, National Geographic and a lot of the people down there will lead you to believe it's only happened in the last 3 years. So, but
the lizard people, Smithsonian, and all.
Okay,
that stuff,
so let's reiterate, because that's a big focus on my channel is pre-Columbian contact in Florida and the Gulf of Mexico. So you're saying there's people that don't match up with like native skeletal features that are in caverns that would not have had Europeans going into them.
Definitely not.
But they are there.
They've done it. And so, some scientists will say, I've heard them say pre-Columbian. Other scientists will say post-Columbian, but they're definitely not skulls from Maya, and the ones that we located that were definitely not drowning victims.
Okay. Now, can I ask you,
sure.
I have multiple articles in my files of giant bones of giant humans over 7 feet tall getting pulled out of the springs in Florida, Cedar Springs. I have a couple articles. I can show you them if you'd like.
Yeah,
but
I'd love to see it. Now
in South America, they have a lot of those elongated skulls.
Sure.
Do you see any stuff like that?
Oh yeah. We've seen modeled skulls and stuff like that, especially in the cenotes. As you move closer to Guatemala, we've seen more of the modeled skulls and stuff like that.
Now, I've had this question up for a little. Do any of these caves make it out to the ocean?
Yes, absolutely.
Now, could you enter any of these caves from the ocean and make
in Mexico? Yes, there are one or two. In Florida, I will tell you what ends up happening. Salt water is extremely corrosive. In Florida, currently, there is no Anki A-line or ocean connection to fresh water. We know water's coming out, and we've dye traced it, and we know that is happening. But unfortunately, because the salt water is so corrosive, at a lot of these junctions between the fresh water and the salt water, you'll reach a terminal breakdown. And so currently in Florida, there is no true ocean to inland cave. The longest ocean cave currently in Florida is in Palm Harbor, Florida. Believe it or not, it's Crystal Beach Spring.
Wow.
We tried, still are trying. It's not an active project project, but we really believe that it was going to connect to Blue Springs in Palm Harbor, which is a private site, but we're never able to do that. The most likely cave that there'll finally be an ocean to spring, freshwater connection will be at Big Spring Creek in Crawfordville. So we'll see what happens there. But that part of the Wakulla Aquifer, it goes very dark, and it's very rare for the water visibility to reach levels so you can navigate. Giant bones found in Florida, 7 foot.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd love to. You guys got to I had to take a look. I'm trying to. Where do you guys know where Cedar Springs is located? Is that up there north of Apopka in the St. John's area?
I was wrong. Sorry, this is Silver Springs. Silver Springs Giant.
Oh, still.
This is Silver Springs near Ocala.
Wow.
And they say that this was a submerged burial chamber. And this was, I believe, in Orlando newspaper.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with it. I am familiar. Originally, Silver Springs was called Mammoth Cave.
Yeah.
Because of the high level of mammoth remains and stuff. Mm-hmm. It's owned by the DEP. Eric Hutchinson did a lot of the mapping and stuff. And I'm not familiar with this. I was told in some of the stuff we were working on in South America that, as you know, and once again, I'm not trying to debunk. I'm just adding another. Giantism is something that occurs, it's very rare, but you can only imagine what indigenous people would have thought of a child or even an individual born with giantism. They probably really would have been, either shunned or just magnified as this incredible individual. It's possible there could have been a group or, go ahead.
The Timucua natives of Florida, when the Spanish and French arrived, were between 7 and 8 feet tall.
Yeah.
And the Seminoles, who are still alive walking today, in the 1960s, when they were still barefoot, living outside 24/7, average height of a Seminole man, 6'4", and they lived to 100 years.
I know.
Wow.
Yes, that I do know. Yeah.
So, we have some traces of these giants, and the Carib people in southern South Florida in the Caribbean, the Carib named for Caribbean, they were also said to be 7 feet tall, a head and a half taller than the Europeans.
Oh yeah. As I, looking at genealogy and stuff like that, I mean, it's not a racist thing to say that, color, race, orientation, it's natural for the human species to really migrate towards likeness and stuff. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if there were people who inherently were tall would, wouldn't want to be with a tiny little person. So you could end up with a pretty, large group of individuals who, genetically were tall, giants compared to some other of the native people here in Florida. So I don't discount anything.
Yeah, there's no 8 foot tall people going into those caves, squeezing in through those small openings.
No. I will say this, one of the coolest sites I've ever dove is a warm mineral spring in Florida. It's one of the furthest southern sinkholes, and it's a thermal spring, and there's still research going on there. There are a lot of there's always been a lot of problems and stuff, but burial chambers located all around the shallower circumference of warm mineral spring, and lots of skulls and a lot of good information. I don't know if they ever found any really large Homo sapien remains, but they definitely know that as that water table dropped in that sinkhole there in south of Sarasota, that there was burial chambers all around the circumference and stuff. But it's one of our few warm, thermal springs here in Florida. Yeah. Even Sulphur Springs has some thermal vents that water comes out at like 86 degrees. It's amazing. So.
Now, Brett, we don't want to jinx you here. God bless you. You've had a safe career. Have you ever had a scary blackout situation or gotten lost?
Yeah. There's a book that just came out that I was able to compose, probably one of my closest calls. It was during that period of time where divers were moving from deep air to using mixed gases. And I had successfully managed to, deal with narcosis and swimming down to depths of almost 300 feet, which never, ever, ever should do. And I just got one of my first deep water diver propulsion scooters. And on this particular dive, I was convinced I was invulnerable to narcosis, the rapture of the deep, basically the accumulation of nitrogen that causes this narcotic effect. But what I didn't calculate was when you're swimming down to depth and the nitrogen levels are going up in your blood, it's happening slower. And I got on this scooter and shot down so quick that the nitrogen levels in my blood shot up. And I literally, it would be the equivalent of slamming a 12-pack in less than 10 seconds. And so I was on the scooter, and all of a sudden I felt the lights going out, and I dropped the scooter, and I immediately started looking for the guideline. And as I was swimming for the guideline, everything just went black. I didn't go unconscious, but due to the nitrogen overload that was occurring in my bloodstream, I lost my vision.
Wow.
And I'd like to say that I kept my composure. I think I was, I want to say I was 25 years old, not much younger than you guys. And I just still to this day don't know how I made it out. I remember kind of surrendering my panic to a state of calmness, and a small light opened up when I got to the surface. Most of the capillaries in my eyes had ruptured, and a filling had literally popped out of the back of my mouth because I ascended so quickly. But fortunately, I continued to exhale, and and then shortly after that, I just had to make a decision. Either I'm going to keep doing this and embrace the technology and the logistics of using, the right gas, the right equipment that I needed to do, or, just get out of it. And it was bad. I mean, I had to sleep with the bathroom light on for a few nights.
Wow. Yeah, tell us the truth, Brett. The water nymphs saved you, right? They dragged you out of there.
It's possible. Yes, it's very possible.
Nice. Yeah, that's what I like to hear.
Any, oh no, you were saying?
No, but, there's the name of the book is Close Calls, and it has basically a whole collection of stories of divers. But once again, that's a part of progression. There's been a lot of times where I'll go someplace and something goes wrong, but fortunately, my training and the progressive, I get out, and then you always have to reflect back, and you could say, "I'm not doing this ever again. I nearly died," or you say to yourself, "What did I do wrong?" And I'm not going to do that again. And how am I going to modify my mindset and my behavior to continue to progress? And so, knock on wood, I enter even now with all the experience and things that I've, managed to compile. I never start a dive saying to myself, just going to do this again. You gotta renew your mindset and do it that way. If you don't, you're going to be in big trouble.
Can you pull that question back up, Narco? Because
I
the watchers want to know what sort of exercises in order to grow their balls to the size of yours. Is there anything in particular? Is there any foods that you eat, any drinks that you consume, so we know? Because I'm trying to do the same thing too.
Oh my God.
It's once again, it's just a desire. I've discussed this. When you come back from these types of experiences, even in a controlled situation, you feel, not to be spiritual, you feel reborn. Have you guys ever done something and you're like, whoo, and then all of a sudden the sun's a little bit brighter and the grass is a little bit greener. And if jumping out of a plane gives you an adrenaline rush, then cave diving's like wringing out a washcloth, because I tell you, by the time we're done, sometimes you sit in that habitat and you're just like,
well, I may add, secret societies would do their rituals and rites inside of caves for that same thing, because it simulates the womb, the Mother Earth, and all this stuff. So it's a reborn again ritual, and you're literally diving back in through the birth canal of Mother Earth, and
very primordial, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're hanging out in there and taking videos. It's gonna do something to you psychologically, 100%.
But we made a joke T-shirt one time that said "Cave diving is primordial," and it had 2 cartoon sperms with cave lights in line. So, but
exactly.
No, but like I said earlier, when you're back 10,000 feet, and you're 300 feet deep, you're not thinking about your family. You're not thinking about the bills. You're not thinking about the fact that you got to do an oil change in your car. But believe it or not, you're not really also thinking about certain aspects of your equipment because you've gone over them. The thing is you have to separate yourself from certain things and focus on the environment. But in order to get to that point, you have to be so familiar with your mantra and your equipment and how you're going to react and what you're going to do. Because, as the environment's changing and you're going further and you're going deeper, it's progression. It really is, and like I said, it's not a physical thing. I mean, there's certainly, you want to be in okay shape to do some of what we do, but most of it takes place here in the mind, and being able to kind of calm that inner thing that's going, wow, you're awful far away from the entrance and you got kids, et cetera, et cetera.
Yikes.
So
Deep wells in Broward County.
yeah, so I'll expand this question a little.
Sure.
I have the understanding that most of these subterranean caverns are north of Lake Okeechobee. Are they common south of Lake Okeechobee, or are there any at all, or are there just not as many entrances on the surface?
I'd really have to ask some of my friends that do. I mean, there is a huge part of the water management districts that do core sampling, and it's all public information. Absolutely. I do know when they were doing a lot of canals and stuff, I heard rumors that there was a small freshwater lens and aquifer in some of those areas around Okeechobee and Broward County and stuff. But you certainly have an amazing superficial layer of limestone there. I mean, it's like Swiss cheese. And the reality is the superficial layer of limestone where you guys live is much like Cancun, but what's different is the next layer, and you don't have a real clear lens. You don't have an aquifer like we have up here and like is in Cancun, but the limestone there is certainly present for something like that to form over the next millennia. You just don't know, but not to my knowledge. That's my question. But you could certainly reference core sampling and anything like that from your water management district. I mean, I'm certain that there's voids and large cavities in that matrix of limestone in that area. So,
All right.
the thing that concerns me most about that is, like I said, most of this deep well injection that's migrating through a series of canals from Orlando and making its way out, they're really changing a lot of things. What I think is great sugarcane industry, but I think the next thing they need to do to get a hold of this toxic green algae and all these things that are happening is really diminish the nitrates that are being introduced and making their way all the way from St. John's and Orlando and Apopka and out through those series of man-made canals and stuff down to the Okeechobee and that wetlands down there. I mean, but they're working on it. You'll see what happens. Are there any? Okay, go ahead.
Well, no, I think that's all good. I think we'll let you go, Brett.
All right.
That was tremendous. That's That's actually the highest turnout we've ever had on the live chat.
Excellent.
Over 800 people. That's pretty amazing. So, thank you, Brett. Thanks for everything. Thank you for the videos. Yeah. And I wish you a lot of luck on your future dives.
Oh,
I have one more question for you.
Sure.
What is it's a two-parter. What's the common age of retirement with cave diving? And when do you plan on? Is it something that people give up because they want to? Is it like football where there's just a common age where everyone gets out at the same time? Are there people in their 70s down there?
Oh, yeah. I mean, some of our cave diving pioneers are still diving. Bill Main, who really established a lot of the logistics for especially equipment configuration. Bill still cave dives, and Bill's in his 70s. Paul Heinrich, who has been cave diving since the 72, 74. I think his training number is 8. They're still diving. up until a few years ago, I was having so many issues with deep diving and stuff. But I'll tell you, some of my most successful dives now due to recompression schedules and equipment and being able to stay warm. So I guess the question is when my mind and my body just aren't doing what I'm thinking they should be. Here's the saddest thing. I was talking to some of my friends the other day who we're all the same age, believe it or not, except Matt Vinzant. He's a little younger than us. Mm-hmm. Some of the biggest opportunities of our life are literally coming down the pipe right now. I mean, things I can't really talk about. Once again, they don't have to do with treasure or anything like that. We're asking ourselves, I mean, a good example, I mean, how do we explore below 400 feet? I'm 55 years old, and it's like, we all say the same thing to each other. Need to cut back on the cookies, get out there and jog, and realistically know when it's time to throw in the towel. And to answer your question, I'll probably still cave dive. I don't know if I'll be doing, 400 footers at 10,000 feet when I'm 70 or 60, but I'm hoping to still at least enjoy cave diving. But the sad thing is I really enjoy it on that edge. I love the logistics. I don't know if I'd ever be happy just visiting the local spring and doing a little swim dive. So I think when it's time for me to exit, I'll probably just exit completely. There's your answer.
Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Of course, Brett. Yeah. Is there anything you'd like to close with? Anything you'd like to promote, plug, recommend, ask of people?
Just like I said before, with all the maps and videos and things that people see out there, there is a good, safe way and a good progressive way to do this type of diving. These things aren't going anywhere. Unfortunately, a lot of our recoveries that we've had to do in the last couple of decades are people who are highly qualified divers. And they really, and I know some guys who are highly qualified commercial divers, but the thing is it's not apples and oranges. It's apples and avocados. It's a difference between a vegetable and a fruit. If you want to do this type of diving at any level, just take the time, get the right training, and be progressive, and it's not going anywhere. Don't go fast. Take your time.
Yeah. This was awesome, Brett. And I just want to say that I'm never going to do this ever in my life because I'm too scared to do that. But it's really cool that you do it. And thank you for the videos and everything. And best of luck to you on your future dives. And
thank you.
We'll stay in touch, hopefully. So thank you
again.
All
right, guys. Take care. Have a great New Year.
Now, Brett, we're going to sign off here. You stay in the room with us. We'll do a little post interview. But guys, everyone give your blessings to Brett. Wish him many more safe dives. And let's keep pushing the envelope. Maybe take it 400, 500 feet, 600. But thanks, Brett. Have a good night.
Later, everybody.